This video I'm going to compare Open Season to Wreck-It Ralph. Now I've seen both these movies multiple times, but the difference is I've watched Wreck-It Ralph more than once within the past few years. When it comes to Open Season, this is an anime movie I watched years and years back. I don't remember exactly when. And then within the past 2 years, I was like, oh yeah, this is a movie I watched a while ago. Don't really remember it all that well. Let's rewatch it. So I did, and I would definitely say that between these two movies, I easily prefer Wreck-It Ralph. The thing is that Open Season is totally fine movie, but I don't think it's a very memorable one. I don't really find it all that interesting. I don't have that much to really say about it. If I was deciding what movie am I going to rewatch, not really interested in rewatching Open Season, to be honest. It feels similar to Rio, for example, because both movies have an animal being raised by a human that meets another animal who shows them the wild, and also you have a plot line about all the animals banding together to drive back the hunters. That's in Rio 2 specifically. In the case of Wreck-It Ralph, I think the premise here is actually pretty interesting, to be honest, because you have these arcade game characters who are living their own lives without the humans knowing about it. They just think that, hey, you have these arcade games, there are characters in them, but they're not doing anything when we're not playing the arcade games. But in actuality, Pac-Man, Bowser, all these other characters, they talk with each other. They're able to travel between the different games. Also, one of the big things this movie's about is this guy, Ralph, who is designated the bad guy in his game. He's the Ralph who always wrecks everything. And yet, we see that, oh, actually, even though he's designated as the bad guy in the game, he's not like a mean person. He's not like a bad guy. He's not actually a villainous character. He wants to be seen as a good guy, and so he's on this mission to get a medal. Thus, he ends up going over to this other video game that's kind of like Call of Duty. It's this shoot 'em up game where you have these soldiers fighting off against alien bugs. He ends up accidentally bringing this kind of bug over to another game that's a racing game, and so the racing game ends up being taken over by the alien bugs. Also, you have a dynamic going on between Felix and Calhoun. Calhoun's this lady from the Call of Duty-esque shooter game. Felix is this really sweet, kind of dorky guy from Ralph's game who fixes everything. So the two of them have very different personalities. And yet they actually end up liking each other. Also, I really enjoy the relationship between Ralph and Vanellope in Wreck-It Ralph. It really makes sense. The visuals here are really good. I've not seen another movie that explores this idea. The story is pretty compelling, I'd say. I like the journey that Ralph goes on, where by the end of the movie, he's like, okay, yeah, technically I'm the bad guy, quote unquote, in my game, but I know that I'm not a mean person. And now the other people in my game are totally cool with me as well. They no longer have any resentment towards me. They actually are including me now. So Ralph actually is at peace by the time the movie's over. Plus, even though he and Vanellope are not together all the time, Ralph is able to see her by looking at her game. It's pretty sweet, I would say. Plus, the music in Wreck-It Ralph is really good. There's a twist about who the real villain is in the third act that I would say really works. I think between these two movies, Wreck-It Ralph is much more interesting. I have a lot more to say about it. Open Season, just simply put, feels more familiar. It's more like, oh yeah, I've seen this movie before. So it's just more generic, more like, okay, yeah, it's another one of these movies. So if you're a young kid, you might enjoy Open Season, but if you're older, then I would say there's better animated movies I would recommend watching over Open Season. That'll wrap things up for this one.